Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Magi Show. Today is a pretty special day. It's not only the blue moon and a lunar eclipse, but we also have on the Magi Show today Gary Wayne, and we're going to be talking about ancient giants, the Nephilim, fallen ones, and secret societies. And I've been really looking forward to this show. I've done one so far already on giants with Heather Arnold, and we learned a lot, but can't get enough of this giants topic. So I figured I'd try to get Gary Wayne on the show, and I heard him once before on M&R TV, another show here in Canada run out of Montreal, and he's doing some amazing work. His book is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. So I guess before we get on with the rest, maybe I'll just make sure everything's working on Facebook here. Just gonna share the link with a couple people too, so that can get the live show out there. If anyone wants to share the show for me, please go right ahead. More people sharing it, the better. Just make sure that any groups that you're sharing it in are you've got the permission to do so. Alright, looks like we got some viewers tuning in. Just gonna share the link here with Gary. Yeah, there's a couple other groups that wanted me to share this one too, so I'm just gonna do that quick. And then once Gary's on the show, I'm gonna set up the Facebook chat. So this chat that's showing right now is just from the last episode. So yeah, I'm just gonna share it with my home page here, a couple other groups. Alright, that's the one on my timeline done. And I figure I'll share with my friends at Mario and Robert at M&R TV too. They said that I could share it to their page, so just going to give that a quick share to them. Yeah, and this is actually the third show that I've done in the past 2 days. So, really been a busy week here. Now, the last shows I did, I was a guest on the Silver Psyop, and we talked a little bit about the giants in that show too, so definitely getting a lot of new information about giants this week. Alright, so that's all the groups I think that I was supposed to share it to. I'll set up the chat in a minute. I'm just going to read Gary's introduction here next. Today I just made a little bit of a slide for the introduction, so just in case I butcher the words when I'm trying to pronounce them here, that people can read along. Alright, Gary Wayne is the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave mankind, and details of the modern day Nephilim and Satan's plan to install the Antichrist at the end days. Yeah, one of these days I'm going to have to do a show on the Antichrist. It's one of my favorite topics also. Alright, Gary Wayne is a Christian contrarian who has maintained a lifelong affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. Yeah, definitely. Same case for me too. His extensive study has encompassed the Bible, the Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, Epic of Gilgamesh, and other ancient epics, language, etymology, and secret society publications. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I like Gary's introduction here. That's pretty wild. Right, so next I'm going to open up Skype and see if we can get Gary onto the show. Let's see, get the Skype scene going here. Alright, there we go. There's Skype, and now I'm just going to give Gary a call. Everyone can help pray to the Skype cloud if they want us to get a good connection. Hopefully it won't freeze and won't have to call Gary back more than once for this episode. Oh, looks like we're connecting. Oh, there he is. Hey, Gary.
I am here.
Hey, Gary, welcome to the Magi Show.
Well, thank you for having me, and so happy to be here and looking forward to guesting with you tonight, and very much looking forward to the conversation that we're probably going to have. I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I did get some slides ready from your website too of all the different chapters and stuff that you got, and maybe we could I'll play those while we talk, just so the viewers can see some of the stuff about your book.
Sure.
Yeah, and I did get the Facebook live stream going, and I shared it to your homepage now, so should be all set.
I did, and I just had enough time to share it to the Gary Wayne Genesis 6 conspiracy group. I was hoping to do a couple other groups, but not enough time, so
yeah,
it'll get out. It'll get out, though.
Yeah, I'm sure if anyone else is listening to the show and they want to share it to that group, that would help us out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, I guess what I'm going to do is set up the live chat for Facebook for this episode. And then while I do that, maybe I'll just ask you how you got started doing all of this, or anything more you wanted to add to your introduction.
Sure. And, I get asked that question quite a bit, and it's kind of a bit of a path and a story to it. I mean, you just don't jump into writing a book on secret societies and giants and how they're all connected in the end time. So my way back in was sort of my path back to God and Jesus and the Bible. And it started with reading a book that really just sort of frightened me to the point where I had to verify the veracity of it as to whether or not it was out of context, it was true, it was half true. And that was a book by Hal Lindsey called The Late Great Planet Earth that came out in the 70s. And he was way ahead of his time, not 100% accurate, but I don't think he was trying to be a prophet. He was just trying to understand prophecy and relate it to the times we were in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that reminds me of Zecharia Sitchin, how like when he started, he was pretty much a trailblazer, but he eventually updated his work when it came time to the last episode, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one needs to be, I think, careful of on making predictions, because you're only as good as your last prediction.
Yeah.
But so what I did was I decided I would catalog all the different prophecy narratives in the book, and while I was doing that, I was going to catalog a number of other categories as well. So I went through several times and just wrote them all down and filed them and cataloged them and grouped them together. And the subject about giants in Genesis 6 is a very, very odd story very on in the Bible, and it pops up again after the flood, and you've got talk of angels, and you've got talk of demons, and you've got talk of all of this in prophecy in the end time and in Revelation. And so my thought was I wanted to write some prophecy books, but I wanted to cut my teeth on writing a book first, so I thought I'd write a short one. And that was the plan. And so I thought I'd say, how can I relate Genesis 6 to the end time? Except that somewhere along the road to the Colosseum, as the saying goes, I went down so many different rabbit holes on the research as I was starting to link in mythology and history and other religions, that it turned out to probably be the longest book I'll ever write. At least I hope so, because it's a lot of work to maintain sort of the consistency and the integrity on that much information and that much work. So that's how I got interested in it. And I only, included about 70% of the original manuscript in it, so there's a lot of things not in the book, and I've got also a lot of other research that I didn't put in the book, because it is such a huge topic, and it's just how far down the rabbit hole in each interesting little story that you could talk about do you want to go.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, and like I kind of come full circle with the Bible too. It's like when I was a kid, it's like I loved the Bible, and I researched it a lot. I was even working with the church at one point. And then as I got older, it's like I started to doubt whether or not the Bible was accurate. But then later on in life, it's like when I started researching ancient mysteries, I was surprised how many times that the Bible actually turned out to be very accurate, right? Especially when it comes to historical events. So
it does. It seems to be the more archaeology that's done and the more that they go to deeper into the different sciences, it seems the more they prove the veracity of the Bible. And so a lot of things are hard to prove in the Bible because a lot of it's about prehistory, and we don't get a whole bunch of written records coming down in even what would be considered a historical period. It's just not something that's well documented. And, let's face it, there wasn't put to a sort of a written Bible until the time of the Roman Church, right? You had all these scrolls that they had written down, but those weren't written down to, fairly long period of time in any sort of, I guess, significant organization, at least until around the Temple period where they had somewhere to store them.
Yeah.
And so I know there was, Moses took dictation and wrote it all down, but you wonder, what was lost and what's missing as it came down through history. And so, there's still a lot of things yet, I think, over time that, they'll prove more about the Bible. That's just my particular take on it anyways.
Yeah. One of my favorite websites is, what is it called? TheBibleHub.com. And it gives you a list of like all the different comparisons of different versions of the Bible. And one day I hope they kind of include, what is it, the Dead Sea Scrolls and maybe some of the pagan accounts too, because there's a whole other side to the Bible really people haven't heard, either from the Dead Sea Scrolls or those.
Yeah. There tend to be, though, the Dead Sea Scrolls, although there are, like books of Isaiah and obviously books of the Old Testament that are amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, though, the rest of the Gospels seem to be a little bit different, though, that come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I can put it that way. And they tend to tell a little different story about Jesus. And, when at the time of Jesus and afterwards, there was two groups that were growing up around the movement about Jesus after his death. And one was, the one with Paul and the Jerusalem church. And then there's the other one with that is adopting Jesus into their sort of greater religion, but, as a mortal and as a prophet. So you had two distinct and very powerful organizations as they grew over the first couple centuries, in this era. And not until the Roman Church decides that they're going to pillage, plunder, and kind of destroy their adversary, because they're similar, but they're totally different at the same time in terms of their approach. I mean, one is the Son of God and the Word of God, and the other one is a prophet or a teacher. So two distinct views that are sort of core to the modern Christian movement. So, and so you have those two different things that we're struggling for primacy, and I think we're going to see more of that as we get into the end time.
Yeah, it almost feels like we really are in the end times, all the different big events that are happening on the world stage lately, right?
Well, we certainly seem to be on the horizon. I try not to get into the mistake that so many people have done over the years of saying this is the end time or this is the time of the rapture, because, I mean, the graveyard is sort of filled with false predictions and very credible researchers. It's, prophecy doesn't tend to be fulfilled in quite the manner that people are expecting it.
Yeah, that's true.
And they tend to get a little bit surprised. I mean, the classic example to me is with all the warnings that Israel had from the curses of the covenant if they don't hold it up. But that's not what is surprising. I mean, even though they were warned over and over and over and over and over, and that's hard to believe in terms of what would happen in terms of prophecy, it came true. But missing your Messiah,
yeah, that's a pretty big one.
That's a big one. And they had all of the scriptures there to recognize what they were talking about, but people tend to interpret from their own bias.
Yeah.
And then you get fed on that, and it's unfortunate, but it was also part of the curses of the covenant that they would reject their Messiah, and it was prophesied. So at the end of the day, I mean, all things are going to be completed, but it's just not through the blessings of the Holy Covenant, it's through the curses of the Holy Covenant.
Wow.
But yet there are still a lot of things yet to happen before I think the end time can come about, and we're still going to need an awakening of the lost tribes of Israel as well going into the end time, as well as the formation of a universal religion, as well as a world government. So those are some significant prophetic events yet to be fulfilled, but also things can move very, very quickly with cataclysmic events.
Yeah. No, the big one that stands out to me is the prophecy about Damascus being destroyed. And then we got the war going on in Syria, and how Syria is where Damascus is. So I'm pretty sure Damascus took quite a beating in these wars, right?
It did, but it wasn't totally destroyed, and I
Oh,
think it's a
really?
bit of a so far it hasn't, and I think it's going to survive into the New World Order. But then I think as you get into, it's either going to get destroyed, and I need to have probably a closer look at it again. But Damascus is going to get destroyed either in the Gog-Joel War, the Revelation 9 War, or close to Armageddon.
Wow.
So it's either towards the midpoint or towards the end point. So I don't think, and I know people, the people will say that it could also be destroyed before that, but it just seems to me those are the fulfillment of the Day of the Lord prophecies. So I would lean, without digging super deep into that at this point, because I haven't looked at those prophecies for a few years, that I would lean, from what I remember, towards more of an end time prophecy in terms of the last half of the 7 years.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. All right, so I did get the Facebook chat going now, and we got some greetings from Argentina, from Gracilia, and Nikki's here, and Ryan's here. So if anyone's got any questions as we go, feel free to ask. And if we happen to miss your question, like it didn't show up on the screen when we were talking, you can feel free to type it again. I don't mind the duplicate comments in there. All right, next I think what I'll do is bring up some slides that I got ready so we can talk about your book, the Genesis 6.
Sure.
I'll just switch this over here. All right, the first slide that I got ready for today is just the Genesis 6 quote on its own, so I could read it for everyone so they can get an idea of what we're talking about here. I'm just going to refresh this Skype. It should come in a second. Alright, Genesis 6:4 is the verse that Gary's book, I believe, is referring to, and it's the Nephilim were here on the earth in those days, and also afterward. And when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So that's pretty much like a reference to the giants, I believe, right?
Yeah, it is. And if you go back, a couple of verses, it's going to say giant, right? So this also, it will, depending on the translation that you're looking at. If you're looking at King James Version, it's going to refer as the offspring of the sons of God as the giants or as the Nephilim. And Nephilim is the word that goes back to Hebrew for giant in Genesis 6 and also in Numbers 13, whereas all the other references to giant in the Bible will go back to Rephaim as opposed to Nephilim. And so, right, so, and Nephilim is, it comes from the word Nephil, which is to fall, and I am, which means ones, and sort of stands for the fallen ones. And so a lot of people will confuse that as the Nephilim as the fallen angels. And I think that's a little bit either a conflation of other religions and other mythologies, or it's both. Because if you get into, and let me explain that. So if you get into Greek mythology, or as you were mentioning about Scythian with Sumerian mythology, or in Japanese mythology with the Tengu, you have Anunnaki and Titans in Sumerian and Greek mythology, and you have the heavenly Titans and you have the earthborn Titans.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, I've never heard about the Japanese version of, what was that again?
The Tengu.
Oh, the Tengu, yeah. I'll have to try to get a guest on the show about that sometime.
Yeah, all of these, I put out a couple blogs on the Tengu. But giants are on all continents, right? And they are known by many different names and in all religions and all mythologies around the world, as is the flood.
Yeah.
And so you have the Anunnaki, which are also the Anunnaki of the heaven, and the earthborn Anunnaki. Sometimes they're called Igigi, especially I think in the Scythian work, that there's a separation. But this is a sort of a standard understanding that these were gods that were born of the earth from the gods or from the fallen angels, and that they're called the same, just that one is an opalescent sort of spiritual higher level being, and the other one is a shining being, which the Anunnaki were known as and shone from the eyes, just as they're known in many other cultures as well as shining beings, but they're a physical demigod as opposed to a full-fledged god, right? So
I haven't heard
they're the earthborn ones.
Yeah, I haven't heard that Shining description very often before. That reminds me of the Dead Sea Scroll depiction of what Noah looked like, right?
Yes, it does, and in that account that you're talking about, and I think it's Lamech who is concerned, and the Lamech of the Seth line, not of the Cain line, and he's afraid that Noah is a child of the angels in that account, and I
Ah,
actually put that account in my book, and so and he just as a baby just lights up the whole room. And he's got this pale white wrinkly skin just as the Nephilim did. And so there's something a little bit, at least from that account, we don't get that account in the Bible at all, but from I think that's from the book of Enoch. It
yeah.
is an account that suggests that there's something more to Noah than just a son, or as Lamech was thinking, he might have this evil Nephilim tyrant that somehow he got. But he's kind of reassured that that's not the case. But Noah's going to be a sort of a special individual. So,
Yeah.
but again, as I said, we don't get that scripturally. But so, anyways, you have the earthborn ones and you have the heavenly born ones, and in this case, the fallen ones kind of describe the Nephilim as well, because they fall from grace as well. And
Yeah.
whether again it's in mythology or in the Bible, they become these evil tyrants. And they're also known as the mighty ones, which goes to that word Gibber. Okay, as
Okay.
mighty ones again, right? Gibber, mighty. Now, not in every application in the Bible where it uses Gibberim or Gibbor does it mean a giant, but in
Ah,
say 120 some odd times out of the 158 times, it does mean giant. So you have to be a little bit careful, especially when you understand that Nimrod is also known as a mighty one,
yeah.
and he's actually the son of Cush. So, and Nephilim tend to be, the sons of at least the first generation born ones are the sons of angels and of human females. And also the name Men of Renown is quite interesting as it describes it as well, because that goes back to the word Shem. And, that's men of fame, men that are going to be remembered, just as the name Shem is used for one of the sons of Noah.
Hmm.
Men of reputation, men of glory. And so these were warrior kings, and they were significantly large individuals. These just weren't 8 feet tall. They
Yeah.
weren't 9 feet tall. And depending on who you want to talk to, and it's all speculation as to what the actual size of the giants were in the first generation, they're anywhere from 20 to 40 feet tall is the most consensus.
Wow.
Although some people, and in one translation of the book of Enoch, it's got two different translations for the size of 300 cubits or 300 ells. And so the
Jeez.
thought is how big is an ell? Is it a cubit? Because if it's a cubit, that's going to make them very, very large, right?
Yeah, no
So
kidding.
but we don't know actually what an ell is, and a cubit's more of an overlay in terms of trying to use the oldest of known sort of measurements.
Wow.
But they're called in.
Hello? Looks like Gary might have got cut out on Skype here. I'm just going to go back to my Skype scene and see if we lost Gary. Sorry about that, folks. I'm just going to give Gary a call back. I don't know if Skype is freezing or what happened here. Yeah, it was just Skype froze up on me, so I'll give Gary a quick call back. I'd just like to say hi to the new viewers that are watching. Who would that be? Oh, that's Stormy. I was talking to her on Facebook earlier. Yeah, sometimes Skype doesn't always work the greatest, but we'll get Gary back here in just a second.
I just called back in.
Yeah.
Do you have me back?
Yeah, you were all back and set. Sorry about that. Skype sometimes will disconnect on me.
Yep, it does at times. And so these were considered the giant trees. And so whether or not they're actually that tall or it's a little bit of hyperbole, you kind of get the idea that these are very, very large individuals. And in numbers, again after the flood, as the spies go into the promised land and they see the sons of Anak, which is Numbers 13, where you get the Nephilim going back to giants there, because they're descendants of the giants in the King James Version, which goes back to Nephilim.
Yeah.
They compared themselves to like insects or grasshoppers to these giants.
Well, actually, that's this slide that I got here is a picture of Gilgamesh. And according to the epic, I guess one of his parents was full-blown Anunnaki and then another one was human. But it still left him tall enough that he could hold a lion like that, like a full-grown lion, just in his arms.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'll speak a little bit to Gilgamesh in a second. So,
Cool.
But if we look at, let's say, Goliath, which would be maybe over 2,000 years after the original Nephilim, and of course after the flood, so descendants of the giants that showed up right after the flood that we're just talking about in Numbers.
Yeah.
You have a cubit measurement in antiquity that's 18 inches for 1 cubit.
Okay.
And then there's a building and a royal cubit, which is generally used for the royal bloodlines, of 21 inches. So depending on which measurement of the cubit you're going to use, Goliath was known as 6 cubit in 1 span. And that would make him 9 feet 9 inches on a common, or 11 foot 3 on a royal cubit. And I make the case in the book he was the king of Gath. So he might have been measured on the royal cubit. And Og had a bed that was 15 to 16 feet long on a royal cubit, and it was made of iron because wood was not strong enough to hold his weight.
Wow.
And so that would put Og, who, interestingly enough, is described as the last survivor of the Rephaim, and we're not sure whether that means he survived the flood or not, because the Rephaim survived after the death of Og as the Israelites cross the Jordan and wipe out the giants from the covenant land. And as I also will show in my book, is that Goliath, who I just talked about, who shows up somewhere around 400 years later or so, 450 years later, he is a descendant of the Rapha or the Rephaim, which are also descendants of the Nephilim. Yeah. And so Og would have been somewhere probably 12 to 13 feet.
Wow. No, I was just going to ask you a quick question here. It's like a lot of my research, and one of the guests that joined us in the chat here, we've been talking a lot about the Table of Nations lately. It's like basically the book that describes like Noah's ancestors and tracing his bloodline. It's like
First Chronicles and Genesis, yes.
Yeah. What's your opinion on the Table of Nations? Do you think it's accurate? Or I guess there's so many versions of it, it's hard to say which one is accurate too, right?
Yeah, well, we get 2 versions, and they're essentially the same in Genesis and First Chronicles biblically. But, it doesn't have all of the different sort of nations that are even listed in the Bible, which is something that, and again, I take on in the book. And so when we're talking about the Rephaim, or the Avim, or the Nephilim, or the Avim, and on and on and on, with all of these Nephilim nations that show up after the flood, or the Horim, they do not show up in the Table of Nations.
Oh, okay.
But they show up as nations, as early as Genesis 14 in the War of 4 Kings against 5 with Abraham, where he has to save Lot. And so we wonder whether or not there was a second impassioned incursion after the flood, or somehow the giants survived the flood, because they don't go back to the Table of Nations. So how are they accounted for, except that the Bible says that they're not only before but after. And so you can kind of look at that the Bible is saying, okay, we know, we're telling you that they were before, and we're also telling you that don't be surprised because they show up afterwards, even though there's the flood. And Genesis 6 is the introduction to the flood story, so it's connected. I mean, once you get past about 6:4, you move into Noah and into the flood story, right? All part of chapter 6, and then it goes for a few more chapters after that. And let's just link back Gilgamesh into this for an example here of the flood and the giants. And Gilgamesh, as you said, is the offspring of the gods, and he's considered two-thirds god and 1/3 human. Yeah. So he's Nephilim. And if you look at a demigod, and if you take the ancient word of demigod as it goes back to its ancient meaning, it is the offspring of the gods and a human female.
Wow.
Right? So he's a demigod, and that's what these beings were, and people worshipped them, and they were the kings, and they were the representatives of the gods on Earth.
Yeah.
And so he is a tyrant, and whether or not he was from before the flood or not, but the Epic of Gilgamesh says he was born after the flood. And even though in the Dead Sea Scrolls on the Book of Giants from 4Q 531 and 534, I believe, it mentions Gilgamesh's name. So he may have been named as a giant before the flood, or somehow he might have survived the flood. Hard to know. It doesn't really tell us.
Yeah.
And Enkidu, or Enkidu as he's called, who is raised up to offset the evilness of Gilgamesh, because he's a typical Nephilim tyrant, becomes a friend with them. And so that plan sort of goes awry. And then as the Epic of Gilgamesh goes on, it tells the flood story.
No,
the flood story is with
Pishtin. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, Enkidu's came up in my research quite a bit, too, and it's like, it's interesting how the Sumerians got that, what is it, the King's List that goes back, like, so far. Yes. It's, like, ridiculously...
The Larsa List and the Sumerian King's List, yes.
Yeah, it goes back with, like, huge lifespans, and then Gilgamesh is eventually listed on that. And then after his reign, it seemed like the lifespan started to decrease to like a more regular amount. And the whole story about Enkidu was like his best friend Enkidu died during the epic, and he turned down the opportunity to become immortal. And I was wondering, did he turn that down because he wanted to see his friend Enkidu again? It almost makes me think that the other gods, seeing that Gilgamesh wanted to die, and that's all of a sudden what we started seeing happening is these big lifespans no longer continued, right?
Yeah, well, two things is one is Enkidu is killed because of what he and Gilgamesh do against the warning of the gods, and he goes after King Habada of the Cedar Forest.
Yeah.
And this is a very, very strange-looking individual. He's got lion qualities and a whole bunch of other different sort of aspects of some sort of hybrid being, but he's also a king. And so he's sentenced to death because for doing that. And so Gilgamesh is very much saddened by that. And now on the age level is that in the first generation, one presumes that they were created immortal with the immortal spirit of the gods.
Wow.
And also in Genesis, and I think a lot of people, and they do disagree with me on this, except that their math doesn't work, they confused the 120 years that's listed in Genesis 6 on life being limited. I interpret that as God is stepping in to limit life to 120 years after the original ones start to die out, and it takes a few generations for that to happen. Because you even have Noah living to be 950 years old, right?
Yeah. No, it reminds me of the Blade Runner story.
As well as the Giants,
How they limited they just limited the lifespan of those androids so that they wouldn't get out of control.
Yeah, it's like just altering the DNA or the program, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people think that's the commission of Noah, except that you can only come up with 100 years. So, and I don't believe the Bible is inaccurate. Yeah. And so their bodies would not, after this edict, though, their bodies were not permitted to be immortal, so they would die out. And that's where the demons come from. So they would commit suicide or they would be killed, but their spirits wouldn't go to sleep, and they weren't permitted into heaven. And they're the demons that are roaming the earth, and the ones that Jesus talks about thirsting to have a body because they still want to interact with this physical world, and there's no way they're ever going into heaven.
Jeez.
And so I think that's what's also being played out in the parallel sort of side of the polytheist versions, where you see this lifespan coming down as well. And so, again, you have that common parallel look in prehistory, and on that thing, Pishtin is the archetypical Nephilim to survive the flood. Again, 2/3 God, 1/3 human, and so is all of his family. And he's a tyrant god to boot, and he's the last king at the time of the flood.
Wow.
And so he's picked. So this is just, to me, it's a parallel Nephilim story surviving the flood.
Wow. No, we did
As
get
opposed to being, and just let me finish, because
Sure.
I think this is a good point here that I'm about to make, is that, and so I don't think that the Gilgamesh story is the same story that is in Genesis, that Genesis was copied because this is an older surviving an account. I think it's a parallel account.
Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of people try to merge the two together, but I think they're similar, but not the
details
actual...
are complete. Yeah, the details are completely different.
Yeah,
so,
like some people will say that bird reference to find land, but it's like people did that all the time in the old days, so it's not like it was just the Bible story, right? Or just
and again, you see this happening over and over and over in other mythologies and religions. You have a human survival story and you have a giant survival story. Yeah. And so another classic example might be Deucalion and Pyrrha out of Greek mythology. And everybody says, well, that's the Greek Noah. Well, okay, fine, except that Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. And so whether Prometheus is a Nephilim father to Deucalion or a Titan god, no, it still makes Deucalion Nephilim. And so it's another Nephilim story.
Wow.
And also within the Epic of Gilgamesh story is you have the creation of Gilgamesh, which is a second incursion of gods violating the laws of creation, and you have an ark story. So I lean to giants showing up from the flood with a second incursion that takes place after the flood, but I'm also open to the fact that possibly other peoples survived the flood as well, because you have all of these different stories again around the world, and again, even in the Bible, you have people like the Gerzites and the Geshurites who show up that do not go back to the Table of Nations in the Bible, and and they're closely associated with giant tribes like the Horim and the Malachites or the Alakim, and you also have some pretty strange associations between the Maccathites in Bashan with the Geshurites, and of course Og was from Bashan, right? The king of Bashan. And then you also have the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites, who don't go back to the Table of Nations. And the Kenites and the Kenizzites, their history and mythology says that they're actually the descendants of Cain, just as Kenite translates back to Hebrew as a descendant of Cain. So,
no kidding. No, I researched the Canaanites all the time and found out about how they met their demise and everything. And I wondered if they were the redhead giants, because their descendants, the Phoenicians, were just shown recently in a DNA study to have red hair. So I was like, wow.
Yeah, so typically you have red hair and hazel eyes showing up.
Yeah.
And you have blue hair and blonde hair and blue eyes showing up. Also recorded in not only in Greek accounts out of Atlantis for the giants having that same hair color, but also in the Kishimaya accounts, but they also take their descendancy back to an island continent, which seems to be either Mu or Atlantis, and I would lean for Atlantis. Doesn't mean that there weren't other hair colors and skin colors, but white, red hair, and blonde hair, hazel eyes, and blue eyes are the sort of the standard Middle East and Northern accounts.
Yeah.
And as the Tuatha Danann, who say they are from the Scythians who escaped from Tartarus, which is in the Greek account, you have the red-haired, hazel-eyed giants and the blue-haired, I keep saying that today, blonde-haired and blue-eyed giants that went up into Germany and into the Norse, right?
No, it's incredible
into Russia.
It's incredible how many cultures, like even around the world, we keep finding these red-haired giants, like in America and even in Asia, and it's like they're always usually associated with gold mining too. I wonder if that's a coincidence or not.
No, it's not a coincidence, because obviously it was a very, very important aspect to religion, power, and affluence, and a very kind of a rare commodity. But again, it's one of those consistencies that's all around the world. And you mentioned the red hair and the North American ones, so they also have these elongated skulls.
Yeah.
Well, again, giants in prehistory are thought to have those elongated skulls, just as you even see that as prevalent as late as King Tut and Akhenaten, his father, and they have these elongated skulls with usually wearing these caps to cover them, and those are huge. They are bigger than humans, and even the ones that they're discovering today are bigger than the human skull. And you can bind this sort of elongated skull with a human skull from an early age, but you can't increase the capacity or the size or the volume of the skull.
Yeah.
And these were, and what they find in Peru or North America today are nowhere near the size of the ones that go back into prehistory.
No, so they're more like 7 feet comparison, right?
Yeah, a lot of the ones in North America are 7 feet, but you've got accounts on giants that range anywhere from 8 feet to 18 feet in North America.
Holy.
And there's also a fairly rich newspaper accounting from about the 1850s and the 1940s of these discoveries as well.
Nice.
So there's a lot that has been discovered that people try and keep sort of out of sight and
under wraps or whatever.
Yeah, technically called UPARTs, out of place artifacts, and they just collect dust in vaults somewhere.
Jeez. No, we actually got a question already from the viewers. And this viewer and I were talking about the Scythians actually before the show today. So maybe this question is something regarding that. I don't really follow it, but I'll read it here. It's like, are there any identifying polymorphisms in their DNA? 16249C, 16270T, 16311C, or 161912T.
Yeah, that might be a little bit above my pay grade to identify certain parts of the gene.
But
me too. In their belief system, they do believe in what they call the gene of Isis, which is where they also derive from their polytheist side of the beliefs where Genesis comes from.
Wow.
And this is the gene of the gods that they all carry.
Cool.
And they call that also the sort of the marker and the spark of the divine. And you might know that in secret society understanding as 1,000 points of light. And so they believe they have not only their own genealogies for the more pure bloods that take them back into prehistory, but they also have DNA markers. And a lot of people also believe that the Rh negative bloodline is also part of the bloodline of the royal families and the giants as well. That's a little bit more speculative, but there tends to be a lot of royal families with Rh negative blood.
Yeah, it's funny how that red-haired elongated skull in South America just had DNA testing done on it, and I believe the results are going to be announced in February, right? So.
Well, initial ones before, and we're going to get some more from what Mr. Marzulli was
L.A. Marzulli,
announcing. But the initial ones that were released before take them back to Scotland, understanding that Picts are they have not have a connection. They're actually part of the Tuatha De Danann tribes, right? And you have red hair in the mix with the Scottish people as well.
Yeah, it's very common there.
And there's also a longer connection that actually goes back into the Middle East from those initial test results. So we'll see what the latest ones are.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. All right, the next slide that I put up here is from your website, and it's about the section 1, I guess, from your book.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to describe this image at all, what we have here, or maybe talk about the section 1?
Sure, and we got a couple of pictures up there, and in section 1 I'm going to start in the antediluvian epoch or before the flood, and heavily from within the Bible understanding of the creation of the giants, as opposed to section 2, which I'll go into other religions and mythology. So the picture on the left there is basically a picture of an archangel angel. It's showing some shining aspect to them.
Oh yeah.
Right, but not as shining as they would tend to be if we actually saw one.
Yeah,
and so
I can relate to that.
And so the angels that mated with the human females are called the Watchers in the Book of Enoch, and those sort of connect back to the seraphim angels of the Bible, and these angels were the governors of regions of the earth. And the Seraph angel and Seraphim, so it goes back, Seraph goes back to fiery serpents. And so the look that they had was more of a viper type look. And with wings, you get sort of this godlike dragon. And this sort of, to me, accounts for so much of the imagery with the gods as being serpents, whether or not they're in the Sumerian tradition, or they're the dragons in China, or the dragons in Japan, or the plume serpents in feathered serpents in Central America. You get the same sort of common description around the world. And the original Nephilim and giants were thought to look just like them. So they also not only had this brightly colored hair with red and blonde and blue and hazel eyes and pale white skin, and shone from the eyes, not as bright as their procreators, but they also had elongated chins, high cheekbones, and slanted eyes, and those elongated skulls, and they had that serpentine look.
Yeah, we actually did an episode on the Magi show, I think it was number 11, and we went really deep into the feathered serpent mythology, so if anyone wants to jump into that, I guess we can't spend a whole episode on that, but it's definitely some interesting stuff, and you find it in the Vedic stuff, you find it in Mesopotamia, South America. It's amazing how many places around the world.
Yeah, you've got the Nagas in India, right?
Yeah.
And they like the Tengu, and the Tengu sort of descend from the more bird-like looking ones that you might also see in the Anunnaki. But they always create a warrior ruling class and a priest class. Of demigods. So
okay, the next slide that we got up here is section 2, the Golden Age. The global testimony for other races.
For the other race.
Oh, for the other race, yeah.
Yeah. So this is what I do is I spend one section of the book and just sort of show that all of the other mythologies around the world talk about the same story before the flood, and they talk about a flood. Yeah. So whether it's a religion or it's a mythology, they have humans and they have giants. And the giants, for the most part, not in all cases, but in most all cases, are always created from the gods with the offspring of human females. And even though in other accounts they ruled judiciously in the beginning, their human nature starts to take over and they become evil tyrants, and the gods bring on the flood and they start anew. Yeah. Right? Same similar story. And the best identical account would be the Atlantean account, that for sure. Is told by Plato in Timaeus and Critias. And so the god Poseidon, he mates with the human female Clymene and produces 5 sets of Titan twins that are going to reign over the 10-nation empire of Atlantis. And that picture on the left is sort of a modern version that people like to use what Atlantis might have looked at from Plato's descriptions for the continent of Atlantis, but not the other parts of the empire, because they were trying to dominate the world and form a world government. And so I can't think of a better analogy to the Genesis 6 story than the Atlantis story with Poseidon and Clymene.
Yeah, do you have a guess or some sort of a estimate or a theory about where Atlantis is? Is it like under the ocean, you think? Or?
Yeah, I think it's under the ocean. Some people believe there was a crust shift and it's actually in Antarctica, possibly. Yeah. Because the flood story was more than just the flood. And again, I'll point in my book and show passages out of the Psalms and other passages that shows a conflagration of events that happen in the flood story. And the Pleiades is also mentioned a lot in the Bible. And in other accounts, it's 2 or 3 asteroids or stars from the Pleiades that hit the oceans that sort of split the crust, send the water gushing and the flood coming down, and there's volcanoes and there's earthquakes. And so you can actually match those details up fairly well out of the Bible. You just have to look a little deeper.
Nice. Now, I've got a little bit of a theory. Like I do some researching up north here in Ontario, and we're looking at a possible case of finding King Solomon's lost gold mine, and also an ancient offering table that might have been used by Cain and Nod. And then I
Wow.
looked at the story about how, what is it, T. Enoch Titlan was formed. And it was like it talks about a hero or an Aztec wandering down from far up north and then building that city. And I was
Yeah.
like, man, isn't that strange that Cain named his city Enoch? And here we
Yeah.
have a city in Enoch Titlan with close to the same name.
Yeah, you wonder whether or not that has sort of a same sort of historical root or story, and certainly, if you get into and is that a pre-flood or after-flood story, right?
Yeah, I think Enoch Titlan talks about how it was destroyed by a flood as well and then repopulated multiple
Yes,
times after. So
yes,
it's
and
almost matches it.
yeah, and you get also accounts in the Labor Gabala about Cain being associated with Ireland as well. So you wonder where
Yeah.
Nod was, and you wonder how far Cain went, outside of wherever that civilization was. We think it's in the Middle East. That's most people's bias, and I think my bias as well. That would be part of the Sumerian civilization.
Yeah.
But when you look at the different accounts, I mean, the Bible doesn't say there was only one civilization. There could have been many civilizations.
Yeah, like when Enoch wandered down south and built his city, or when Cain did and built.
Yeah.
He ended up mating or having a family with the people that he met there. So it almost implies that there was another group of people that he met, right?
Yeah. I tend to agree with that, and I look at, because I can't reconcile the day 6 account with the Eden account, that the details are completely different in so many aspects. So I look at it as there's two different creations. There's the day 6 creation of humans that are in multiple male and female, and then you have Adam, who's created afterwards, and then sometime later Eve is created from the rib, whereas again in day 6 are created at the same time and in multiples.
Wow.
And that's just one of the many details, and that would account for where does Cain get his wife from, because we're not told of any people of that time after Abel and Cain until Seth comes along, and then not until the 130-year mark does Adam and Eve have more sons and daughters. So who did he meet? And one presumes that Adam was, or that Cain was ostracized before the birth of Seth. So let's say 20 to 40 years old, right? So you got this gap, and where does this person come from? Because he seems to marry right away, have a family, and build a city. The other question is, build a city for who?
Yeah. No, sometimes I wonder if Adam and Eve were not the first people on Earth, but the first Sumerians, and that Cain might have been one of the Sumerians as well. But that's just a theory, I guess. It's because Cain was given the ability to build giant stone structures so that people would bring him food, because he wasn't able to grow food after his first curse, right? So everyone puzzled is, how did the Sumerians all of a sudden rise to civilization and start building this stuff? It seems to match.
And where did Cain get the information to build the first city? That's a high level of technology. So there's two sort of versions that sort of mesh on that come from outside the Bible. One is you have knowledge coming from the gods, right? That they civilize humankind and they provide them knowledge, just as Enoch talks about the forbidden and illicit knowledge from heaven. And then also in the secret societies version, which are the Gnostics, they believe in the 7 sacred sciences. And I talk about the 7 sacred sciences a lot throughout the book, and in the first part of the book, first section of the book, to detail it, is these are the sciences that Freemasonry says were taught to Adam in Eden. And then after he leaves Eden with Eve, because of their fall, he teaches these sciences to the first 2 offspring, which are Cain and Abel, but of course Cain gets ostracized. But he gets taught these 7 sacred sciences, and then Adam teaches those sciences to Seth. So now you have 2 branches of these developing sciences that are going to combine with the illicit knowledge from heaven to accelerate the capacity of this knowledge. And so Enoch, who is the son of Cain from the Cain line, not to be confused with Enoch, son of Jared in the Seth line, who is raptured and goes to heaven,
Yeah.
he's accredited by Freemasonry for being their greatest patriarch of developing these sciences from Cain.
Yeah, and eventually leading to Tubal Cain, right?
Yes, and leading to Tubal Cain. And these 7 sciences split into the secret societies, which they account for their creation at the time of Enoch and Lamech, who's the father of Tubal Cain, again Lamech of the Cain line, and the rise and the creation of the mystical religions that partner with these giants to usurp the ancient world. Wow. And so Freemasonry takes their legends and their history right back to the same account.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I had one of my fans that was watching the show. He picked up a coin at a Freemason lodge, and they had the Mexico coat of arms. And then that's the mythology that talks about how the Aztec hero wandered down south and built Tenochtitlan. So a little bit of a coincidence there, maybe.
Well, and the 5th science, which is called geometry, is called masonry in the craft, and that's the art of building. Yeah. And that's the technology that Freemasonry is most active in. And Tubal Cain is the greatest artificer of metals in the craft.
Yeah. Do you think Tubal Cain survived the flood on the Ark, like was shown in the last Noah movie from Hollywood?
That's a typical Gnostic doctrine, but no, I do not think that that's the case. But there are legends in Jewish mythology of Og hanging on to the boat, and in this case, with the Gnostic versions of the last Noah movie, they substituted Og for Tubal Cain.
Ah, okay, yeah, I was wondering where that came from. That was a really good movie, I thought. Even though a lot of people didn't like it, I'm into the Bible, so I loved it.
Yeah, it did deviate a lot from the biblical account, though.
Yeah, like those giants in that movie were made out of rock or stone or something, right?
Yeah, and do you remember what they were called?
No, it's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, so those were representations of the fallen ones.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. The next section we got here is section 3, the descendants of Enoch and the bloodlines of the covenants. I was just going to say too that there was the person who asked the DNA question earlier mentioned that she had all of these polymorphisms. 2 are Assyrian, 1 is Ashkenazi, and the other is Sami/Berber. So I figured while we're talking about bloodlines next, I would just read that response quick.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of bloodlines that come down through history carrying, the DNA and the bloodlines of the giants, because we know they're after the flood and they're in accounts around the world after the flood. And so there's many different strains and branches of these bloodlines. Yeah. The more pure ones tend to come through the royal dynasties, but they've been intermixed into human bloodlines and DNA to a great deal. But that's also why the royal bloodlines intermarry, is to keep those bloodlines as pure as possible.
Doesn't always work out so well when they do that, though.
No, that's why they got to introduce some outside blood to prevent the blood diseases like hemophiliac and other sorts of
that was the Russian one, and then Hungary had a problem with their royal family too, right?
Yeah, that's part of the Habsburg disease, and that's got to do with the jaw and a few other things. So,
jeez. Yeah. So did you want to say anything more about Section 3 before I go on to the next one? Or?
Well, I think Section 3 is a very, very interesting section because it details these tribes that I was talking about showing up after the flood.
Ah.
And it's important to understand that and the relationship to Sodom and Gomorrah, because the giants who were ruling Sodom and Gomorrah were all part of that story and why you have a destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, again, from the Gnostic accounts, so they don't look at Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain as cities of evil. Their view is that they were cities of light.
No
like
kidding.
The ancient city of Camelot, as their allegories go, and cities of knowledge, and that the evil god of the Bible destroys Sodom and Gomorrah as a city of light. So they have a different view on of the same accounts in prehistory than what Christians do, and certainly what and how they perceive our God.
Yeah, it's almost like opposite accounts.
Yeah, and so these are the nations that have laid in wait to ambush the infant nation of Israel as they come out of Egypt. And so when Israel goes to expropriate the covenant land,
Yeah.
they're not just fighting your average Canaanites. They are inbred with hybrid giants and purebred giants, because it's the kings, like Og is Rephaim, he's Nephilim. His brother Sihon is also Rephaim. And you have a whole bunch of other kings that are like ruling the Anakim or the Rephaim, and you have names like Talmai being made, and Sheshemai and others. And so they have hybrid humans and the Amorite, which was one of these hybrid nations, were considered, quite a bit taller than the average human. So they had giants among them and hybrid giants as well. And these are the peoples that the infant nation of Israel went to war with. So this was to remove the scourge from the land that is most prized by God, the covenant land, and to be awarded to Israel for doing God's will. It wasn't just a mass slaughter of people.
Wow.
And it's absolutely astounding how many wars they fought, and they were all loaded with giants.
No kidding. Jeez. That's pretty awesome. I guess I'll get on to the next one, or unless you wanted to add more to that, sir.
No, Section 3 is a good book that will take you through to Goliath and trace his lineage back to the Rephaim as well, and and the battle that went on with the Philistines. Understanding they were ruled over by the Avim, which is another division of the Rephaim, and so that you get a whole different understanding of the history of Israel and what was going on in those wars with other nations.
Wow. Now, one of the viewers just commented, too, that this is clearing up a lot of unanswered questions, so really appreciate that. That's awesome. All right, the next section I'm really eager to get into, because the Freemasonry keeps coming up over and over again, and this one would be, Section 4, the terminal generation, the time of Jacob's trouble. So I guess this is talking about the Freemasons, or...
Well, this is getting into the end time, and it sort of sets down what I'll talk about in the rest of the book, because you need to understand how this all relates to the end time and the secret societies, how they're connected to the giants, and how they're connected to the mystical religions. So this is about bringing that sort of prophetic understanding into play. And we need to understand, as we connect into here, that somehow the bloodlines and the Nephilim and the giants cross the flood, but so does the antediluvian knowledge, and so does the mystical religions, and so does the secret societies. And again, we get an account that comes out of Freemasonry that sort of demonstrates how this happens. And they look at Hermes finding the two pillars of Lamech that has the directions to where Enoch's knowledge is stored under the pyramids, that they also accredit Enoch for building with the knowledge that they developed that we talked about previously, and brings this knowledge and religion back to Nimrod, who he partners with. And that's why you have the Bible talking about this rebellion of the people at Babel, and manifested in the fifth science of building of the city of Babel City and Babel Tower. And so Nimrod is considered the first grand master of Freemasonry after the flood. And he writes the first constitution for the post-diluvian organization that, goes down to Heliopolis before it's reformed. And so it's important to understand this. And they also form, after Babel, with the dispersion of the languages, the two major religions of that period, with Hermes going to Egypt with Ham and their descendants, and Nimrod staying in the Mesopotamian region and developing the Magi. So you have the priesthoods being developed that's going to influence the whole Mediterranean, and the building that's going to go on with the knowledge that they've rediscovered.
And
so these
I was just going to say, it's neat that the Magi thing comes up.
Well, again, I mean, Magi is just a word for the people running the the polytheist religion, the mystical religion.
Yeah, I like to call them the priests of the winged disc religion, really, right?
Yep, they are, or Zoroastrianism, and that all goes back to, as what people see the representations of in the Anunnaki religion, but it's believed that Enoch, son of Cain, invents that religion, and is in communion with the gods to develop that religion. Wow. And he's known by many different names other than Enoch. So
no, it's pretty wild. Like the world history or world events we see going on right now. There's a lot of Zoroastrians that still live in Iran, and they're getting persecuted and not allowed to practice their religion. So it's amazing how all these old time things that were happening long ago are still occurring on the planet today. Right?
Yeah, they tend to survive all of these different religions and belief systems, and there's a sort of a cosmology that's going on, and that's key to understanding what's going to go on in the end time, because, as I said, these organizations and religions and bloodlines survive. So what are they doing today? And that's what this section is about. Wow. And it's about how they're trying to bring the end time about, because they want this rendezvous with destiny. And so there has to be world government, which they want to bring about under a new Nimrod or a new Nephilim type figure. There has to be a universal religion, which is that Enochian mysticism of the antediluvian world, or the Babel religion at Babel.
Yeah, agreed.
And there needs to be this 10-nation empire that's going to be the new Atlantis in their new golden age. And so they're trying to recreate what was done in the past, because nothing new is under the sun.
Yeah.
And so all of this is what they're trying to bring about, just as the Bible tells about it's going to happen. And what's interesting is, there's an organization called the Club of Rome that reports to the Rosicrucians that was created in the late 60s. And their sole role is to set up world government with 10 major groups of nations. So it's like separate the world into 10 trading blocks, 10 spheres of influence, whatever you want to call it, which matches up perfectly with Daniel and Revelation.
Yeah.
And
it's
also,
a coincidence.
and Francis Bacon, who envisions this religion in this end time marrying with science, called his book The New Atlantis. And of course, he was a Rosicrucian as well.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this, if you remember what I talked about earlier, is that they like to call it the New Atlantis. And if you remember what I said, the Atlantean Empire had 10 nations, and they were trying to establish world government. And they were led by 10 Nephilim kings.
Oh, yeah. So that's another connection.
There's another connection that they're trying to set up for the end time.
Yeah, I noticed on one of these slides here, what is it? Yeah, you had a picture of like a gray alien. It's like have you ever heard the theory that the gray alien is those Ijiji mentioned in the Sumerian text, or no?
No, I haven't heard that theory.
Yeah.
But, in all sort of religions and accounts around the world, except the biblical account, we get these alien, gray alien type individuals, and other types of aliens as well.
Yeah.
And it's very much part of the belief system of the other religions and mythologies, is that there was more than just Nephilim created that were violations against the laws of creation, as a Christian would understand it, in the antediluvian epoch. That they had taken their technology to such a level that's greater than what we have today.
Wow.
And that not only did they create other sort of forms of beings, like, centaurs and lion men and elephant people and all sorts of different things that you hear about in the other mythologies.
Yeah, like the Chimeras, yeah.
Yeah, there was the little people that were also created as well.
Oh, yeah.
And in the fairy mythology, you have 4 different classifications of fairies. One is the ones that come from other planets, that are rebellious fairies, that are led by a Lucifer-type individual. They mate with human females, create earthborn fairies, which is sort of connected into the Tuatha De Danann that we talked about.
Yeah.
And the third one are the daemons, or the banshees, and these are the spirits of the Nephilim whose bodies died out. And then you have the elementals, which splits into 3 groups of people.
Okay.
of little people. And I won't go through all the details on it, but in the ugly ones, whether you have hobbits and the small elves as opposed to the big elves, and
Ah,
you've got gnomes, and it's under the gnome classifications. You have goblins, and they all have specific jobs that they were doing in the antediluvian world. Like
jeez.
you see in Lord of the Rings, you would have dwarves doing the mining and stuff and
Yeah.
building weapons, right?
No, when you mentioned the elves and dwarves and goblins, I started to think of Lord of the Rings right away.
Well, exactly, and they're telling their side of their belief in prehistory there. Now, within this group of ugly ones, you have a group that has flying machines and come through portals and great technology, and they kidnap people.
Wow.
And they do scientific experimentation on them, and they're trying to mix DNA to prolong their species. And this is a common understanding in fairy mythology of a fairy kidnapping.
Yeah.
Now, this particular group that does this is called the Greys or the Grey Neighbors, and similar sort of names to that. And I put a description of that in the book. And if you didn't know, I was describing and showing a fairy abduction. You'd swear it was a gray alien abduction.
No kidding. Yeah, it's weird how some people mistaken those for one or the other. Huh?
Yeah, so I'm kind of open to the idea that they created these types of beings and great technology in the antediluvian epoch.
Yeah. Did you want to mention anything about what this character at the end here, the Baphomet, or?
Yeah, so Baphomet, he's kind of the god of the Templars.
Yeah.
And he's also known as Azazel, or Azazel, depending. And he's the leader of the Watchers.
Wow.
And he's also the same sort of god as the Pan god, right?
Yeah.
And so these are goat-horned angels, fallen angels, and that might be more their debased sort of look as they were punished, and for their crimes against the laws of creation. But Azazel is the leader of the Watchers who went to Mount Hermon in the Book of Enoch and created the Nephilim.
Wow.
And Azazel is the one who is associated with a goat in the occultism. Him and Satan are associated with the cult and the pentagram. And you will see Azazel depicted not only as a goat, but as an angel at times who is hung upside down.
Oh.
So if you go to and he's the one who is used as what they call a scapegoat for all the antediluvian crimes. Just as in the Day of Atonement, you sacrifice a scapegoat, Hebrew Azazel, and go and send it into the desert. And there's no real reason that's provided in the Old Testament for that, but that's Azazel, and that's again, you connect it with the goat, and he's the scapegoat who is charged with all of the sins, and he's hung upside down in Orion in polytheism, although I think he's put into the abyss and will be released in the end time in Revelation 9. And in the chapel at Roslyn, which is built by the St. Clairs, the founder of Freemasonry, modern Freemasonry, you have this angel hung upside down with a rope forming sort of a Z, and he has this pearl necklace around his neck. And that is depicting Azazel, who they believe gave the illicit knowledge to Enoch and his descendants to develop mysticism and their secret societies. And the pearls of wisdom is an allegory for this bank of knowledge, just as you would have the same bank of knowledge known as the golden fleece, and that's also, you have this sheep on a necklace in some of the secret societies that will depict that, or the tables of destiny, or the archives of the Masons, or the Shatia, the hidden vaults of Enoch, the golden apples, the tables of Ham, the emerald tablet. These are all talking about that ancient knowledge, just as does the allegory of the treasure at the end of the rainbow, note the rainbow as a connection to the flood and therefore to the
Oh,
Nephilim.
yeah.
That is not money, that is the bank of knowledge. And anytime you read into the literature or you see movies on this treasure, everybody's always disappointed because it wasn't really treasure, it was always knowledge, right?
Yeah, I often
that they
wonder.
find in them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I often wonder if the Magi, like some people theorize that they were the three wise men that came to visit Jesus, and that they were stargazing to the star Sirius, and that's where they were connecting to sort of like a wisdom bank, almost like the Akashic Records. And that's how they found the birthplace of Jesus, rather than following like a lighthouse pointing the direction.
Well, certainly the Magi were into astrology and astronomy, and
Yeah.
they were the guardians of this knowledge that comes from Babel, because Magi go with Nimrod to Mesopotamia, right?
Yeah.
And so they're going to have that knowledge, and they certainly recognized what was going on with the birth of Jesus. Now, what we don't know about these Magi, I mean, we do know they come from Mesopotamia. We know the Magi are the priests that learned about all of this knowledge, but maybe what they discovered converted them. But whatever is going on with the Magi story in the Bible is they certainly went to honor the birth of Jesus. So they recognized who he was and what his authority was.
Yeah, I always found it strange how in the Bible it's like we had them talking to or coming to visit Jesus first, but really that's like one of the last times that they visited Jesus that we find in the Bible, and then there's that big gap of like almost 15 missing years, so it makes me wonder if something happened with the Magi again, but it was a little bit too controversial, so we really don't get to hear that part.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so many people would love to have those missing years as to what happened with Jesus.
Now, some people theorize Tibet he might have gone to or something too, or India, but I don't know.
It's certainly possible. We don't know, and there are mythologies and written into part of some of the religions over there that Jesus did visit them. Yeah. But did Jesus do that after he resurrected as well? Because he was around for a period of time. And we also know that the disciples would have went there to teach as well, to bring the message. So it's quite hard to know. But certainly the Sikhs certainly believe in Jesus, but again as a mortal prophet and a teacher, as do the Essenes, as opposed to being the Word of God.
Wow. Okay. Is there anything more you wanted to add on this one, or is it all right to go to the next section?
It's good to go to the next one. That's the prophetic section.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then some of the viewers are asking if the show is being recorded. Yeah, it'll be recorded here on Facebook, and it's also going to be posted to YouTube after, but I don't do both at the same time anymore because it causes a little bit of lag, so I figure I'll just do one first and then the other, so definitely people can watch the recording after again. Because we're covering so much information here, I bet you this is a show people are going to have to watch like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, and in a lot of these topics you could do a whole show on.
Yeah, it's true, really. All right, so the next section we got here is the bloodline of the Grail.
Yeah, so this now I'm going to be connecting the story as for the rest of the book. And so that's why the other section is important to understand the prophecy side. You've already been told in the first 3 sections the ancient history. So now we're going to link in what the secret societies and the Gnostics and the Eastern religions believe, weighing more heavily to the Western side with the Gnostics in terms of the bloodlines and the secret societies and how they link themselves back in these bloodlines and how the organizations all are connected. Wow. So this is going to begin at the Jerusalem church, just to get that basis down. You know who the Essenes are, you know who the Pharisees are, you know who the Sadducees are, and how it connects into the mythologies that has to do with the Holy Grail and Joseph of Arimathea, and how the Grail is more of an allegory, not a chalice, for the bloodlines of the Nephilim that marry in with the bloodlines as they believe in Gnosticism, that Jesus married Mary Magdalene and had a child, 3 child, and in some other variations, they have more children. But the third one, Josephus, is the one who carries on the bloodline, marries into the Camelot dynasty, and one of his descendants, through Urigan of the Celtic dynasties, marries Amenabad of the Merovingian dynasty.
Okay.
Right, so I'm connecting in all of these bloodlines and how they're connected to the secret societies.
Yeah.
And
now, I've heard a lot about the Merovingians being connected to the secret societies before, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why you need to know about the Priory of Sion, and you need to know about the Templars and their history, because the knights that made up the Knights Templar were not peasant knights, and they weren't priest knights. They were all, except for two of them, members of royal families and of the royal bloodlines, and they come out of the Middle East.
Wow.
And they form a society that is also connected to the Gnostics, that have molded within Christianity because of the persecution of the Roman Church, and are going to protect the secrets after they of the bloodline and the documents they get to back that up, and the other treasures that they excavate at Jerusalem. And the reason why that's all important is the main founder of the Knights Templar is Godfrey de Bouillon.
Okay.
And he partners with Hugh de Payens and Henry de St. Clair. And St. Clair is only mentioned as one of the founders in the St. Clair account, who are the Rollo descendants.
Wow.
Because they expropriate, and I'll cover all of this in the book,
Cool.
because they expropriate Normandy and marry into these Rex Deus bloodlines, or the Kings of God bloodlines. But Godfrey de Bouillon is a direct descendant of Dagobert, who is the last survivor of the Merovingian Empire.
Wow.
Right?
So a lot
and
connecting, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to connect all of these bloodlines and into the modern royal families, that these are all bloodlines that go back to the Nephilim.
Okay.
And back to the gods. And they have these genealogies that they even protect to today. But you need to understand the connection to the secret societies, because after the fall of the Knights Templar, they're going to make sure that the power that was held by the Templars isn't centered into one organization as it was then. I mean, these are the people who invented modern banking.
Yeah.
They were the most powerful military order. They controlled education and literature with their funding. And so after the fall of the Templars, you're going to have the Rosicrucian order formed, and you're going to have the Freemason order formed with the St. Clairs, with escaping Templars over to Scotland, even though some of them go into the Teutonic and the Knights of St. John order as well.
Yeah.
You're going to have the Illuminati formed. You're going to have the Royal Society formed from the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, and you're going to have the Jesuits formed, and you're going to have the Rothschilds formed, who are the Bauer family out of Germany before they changed their name to the Rothschilds when they set up the London Bank, to fund everything that's going on. Right?
Okay.
So they're going to disperse all of those things that the Templars were doing, so that they don't get stuck this way again. And they all have their own agenda to bring about the Templar dream, which is to have a universal government with a universal religion, with the bloodline of the Merovingians, that have the Scion bloodlines, or the grafted in bloodlines of the Nephilim, and as they believe, the descendants of Mary Magdalene and Jesus.
Wow.
So huge pedigree that has been tracked and kept down, that they're preparing, because they want to present Antichrist to the world.
No kidding. No, I've heard about that escape to that part of Europe before. Wasn't it the Scythians that had to escape to Ireland, or?
Yes, there's several different waves of this. So the Scythians and others from that area of Northwest, they escaped to Ireland and into Germany and Sweden and into Russia. But you've got several different waves of Scythians and other peoples, Trojans. They're all the same people, right?
Wow.
And these.
Uh-oh. Looks like we just lost Gary again. I guess we've been at about an hour and a half into the show. It's just frozen on me. I'm going to give Gary a quick call back. Sorry about the interruption, folks. So I'll give him a chance to just catch his breath here, too. It's nice that Skype is actually reconnecting really fast, so it shouldn't take us more than a minute to reach Gary here. Let's see, I'll try calling him, or maybe if he wants to try calling me. Let's see here. Yeah, I'll try calling him back. All right,
Got you back.
Yeah, we're back again. I think maybe this bloodline topic is a little bit controversial. Cut us off for it.
That can happen a lot as you talk about these things for some strange connection. Where was I cut off? I was rambling, and then I realized your picture was frozen.
Yeah, you were only gone for maybe about 10 seconds or so. We got you back right away.
Was I talking about Japheth?
No, I hadn't covered that part yet. So yeah,
okay,
I like that bloodline. So it'd be cool to talk about that.
Japheth, he and his people and his progeny move into northwest Turkey with the Scythians, right?
Yeah, I've heard that. One of Noah's grandkids. That's pretty amazing. So yeah, you were saying about Magog, right?
Yeah, and Gog in Greek means giant, and it was also a giant's name in Greek mythology, as was Magog. And just as you've got giants like Albion, Gog, and Magog, and others in British and Celtic history as well, because they're moving out of the Middle East there. So I think they take on the names of these giants. And the Scythians also, who are being married into by the descendants of Japheth, they will, in one of their branches, make up the Russian nation. The Russians descend from the Scythians. And
like in the Table of Nations,
Yeah, and Magog is thought to be Russia in the end time in World War III.
No kidding. Isn't there a bit of cannibalism associated with Magog also? Like the Babylon tradition of eating babies, I guess, to extend lifespans?
Yeah, certainly, and with Molech as well. But that's a very, and with the Quinatar and with the Minotaur, and there's a lot of consistency with that aspect that cannibalism was part of what the giants did.
Yeah,
and drinking blood as well. So
no, it's weird too, because the First Nations people had a legend about red-haired giants near that Magog place that were also cannibals. So I was like, wow, isn't it weird how so many correlations we find here?
Yeah, and I don't believe that those are coincidences by any stretch of the imagination.
It's like you can only have so many coincidences before you start to wonder if there's something to it.
Yeah. So again, we're going to make all of those types of connections in section 5 and 6, right? And so one's about taking these secret societies and the mystical religions, marrying them together with the bloodlines, and then I'll move that forward in section 6, and it's about what these organizations are doing today, and how they're trying to bring out with the rendezvous with destiny. So I'll have a chapter on the Rosicrucians. I'll have a chapter on the Illuminati.
Nice.
I've already covered Freemasons. I'll have a chapter on the Royal Society. I'll cover the Rothschilds and how they partner with the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan in North America, and how the U.S. is part of this plan to bring about world government, because it is the platform that they want to use to bring about world government and the Templar Dream, and how that goes back to the Templar Dream and the Sinclairs. So I'll connect all of that together in that section.
Nice, yeah. Like I heard you last time when you were on the M&R TV show with Rob and Mario there. I guess it was a couple of years ago, and I was in the chat asking questions too back then. But it's neat that they're really into the conspiracy stuff, and it seems like, man, this is probably one of the coolest parts of your book.
Yeah, and how they take their belief system back to the antediluvian epoch, to the descendants of Cain, to the giants, and same with their religion and what they're trying to do. Now, they think they are the good people, so, I mean, they're not thinking they're the evil ones, and they call themselves the children of light.
Yeah.
And if you look at that pyramid on the American dollar there,
I can zoom in there.
That's the eye of Osiris, or the eye of Satan, the top of the pyramid. And the pyramid isn't attached yet, because the New World Order that it's talking about there isn't completed yet. Right?
Yeah, and then the bottom it says, order out of chaos, I think it is?
Yeah, well, New Order, secular New Order.
Okay.
A lot of people just translate transliterate it into the New World Order, but it essentially means the same thing. They're trying to create the new Babel. And remember, Babel is a ziggurat, right? Babel Tower?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Tower, pyramid, and ziggurat all meant the same thing in the ancient world. And so...
Yeah, we talked about that actually in my last interview with Jeff. Maybe I'll just put up a quick slide here. Basically, the Freemasons built a play, like the layout for Washington, D.C., and they put in a pentagram to it. But then I happened to notice that it wasn't just a pentagram, but they also added this pyramid at the top. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's slide number 2, I believe. And then they have, here it is, the unfinished triangle part. Yep. And inside of the eye is where they put Freemason headquarters. And it's where Albert Pike has been entombed. And he was one of the highest ranked Freemasons, Confederate general. And I think he did a bunch of other stuff too.
Yeah, so I mean, you can make these configurations and many more on the streets because they built those streets as a understanding that it's a new world city. And they wanted to put their sacred geometry into it. So you have the 52-degree slope in there, as you showed with the pyramid. And it's divided into 26-degree slopes and 13-degree slopes as they build their streets in those different angles. And as you can do with those streets as they're going up like this from the corner, and if you had, the Queen's Chamber and the other chamber that are sort of part way up, those angles are at the angles that I was just talking about, just as the streets are. And of course you also have things like the obelisk, and you've got all sorts of things that are just sort of representative of their mystical religion that are as buildings and as monuments all around the city. Like they did an amazing job of building their religion and their history into Washington City.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like right under the radar, so to speak. But if you know about it, it's like right in the open, right?
Yeah, I did a whole show on those streets. I mean, and I showed pictures, nice. And so it's amazing. Of
maybe if you could send me the link to that one after, I'll check it out.
Okay. Yep.
Cool. So, did you want to add anything more, or is it all right to go to the next one?
Yeah, we can move to the next section, and that is section 7, the House of Dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was talking about the imagery of the angel as a dragon, understand that dragon is a very, very important allegory in the bloodlines. And dragon, as they believe in tracking their bloodlines, is the patriarchal bloodline, or the male bloodline.
All right.
And it's also represented by the raven. So just as you've got a dragon god, you also have that Anunnaki, that's a bird god, right? That's what this is representing, of the bloodlines of these gods that procreated with human females. Now they also have a bloodline for the matriarchal bloodline. These are the female bloodlines that they also track and start new dynasties with. And they would select a particular purebred to start a new dynasty from the female line with a particular dragon bloodline. And so these are represented by the fairy allegory that I just mentioned in passing earlier with the little people.
Oh yeah, we did touch on that briefly, right?
Yeah, and they also have the owl allegory. And so when you look at the serpent-dragon allegory and the raven, and now you have Lilith and the owl, and you have the fairy allegories, you can understand why this is so prevalent, not only in our history, but in our entertainment. And we're just inundated with this imagery because they're keeping their legacy alive in front of our very noses, and people just don't recognize it.
Yeah, it's like hidden in plain sight is the saying, right?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is now start tracking back these bloodlines all the way back into prehistory, back to Cain, back to the giants of before the flood, and right up to the flood, and just show you how they sort of track these Western bloodlines back into history. And I call it, the bloodlines of the dragon.
Yeah, and you mentioned Lilith briefly there, and she's apparently the first woman before Eve, I guess. Is that how the story goes?
That's one version,
but
she's also seems to be some sort of Nephilim demigod. And the Lilith version comes out of the mystical Hebrew version, which is borrowed from the Sumerian version.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so Lilith comes more out of the Sumerian aspect and is more of a female demigoddess that goes back and is from the bloodline of Tiamat, which is a god
Oh,
that would be
way up the
considered
food chain. Yeah.
way up the food chain
Yeah.
as sort of the parent bloodline of the fairy and owl allegory. And of course, that's why, and so Lilith would be a descendant of Tiamat, which is why she's associated with that owl and the dragon imagery that I've got in that middle picture with the owl and the snake and the crown and the
Yeah. No,
right?
the Tiamat reminds me too of the Order out of Chaos. So that she was apparently like a sea creature that used salt to help bring order
Yeah.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and is killed in Mesopotamian mythologies by characters like Marduk
Yeah.
or Baal. And so Tiamat is also known as Lotan and some other names in these Mesopotamian accounts, but very much similar to Leviathan.
Wow. No, it's
And
a popular
the Hydra out of Greek mythology. And again, this account of this type of god or sea creature is all over the world. It's not just in the Bible.
No, and then our media or pop culture puts it in video games all the time too. Tiamat's a popular character. Huh?
Yes.
Oh, no kidding. And I guess this last picture, would that be like a golden idol built by the pagans, or?
Well, yeah. So I mean, if you look at that closely, is you've got the horns of a like a calf or a goat like looking, but I think it's more of a horned calf, and it's got the cobra up top, right?
Oh, yeah,
So
right
this
there.
is so this is part of that imagery that goes back in the dragon mythology, just as you have the cobra as being the main part of the pharaonic dynasty, right?
Yeah.
You see that on all of their iconology.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
And just as Osiris is a serpent god, and the Ogdode gods of their creator gods were all serpent-like gods. I mean, this is very, very common. So I'm just showing the type of allegories and things that you're going to need to understand how they hide everything in plain sight.
Yeah.
And so you're going to learn that in these last chapters, sort of in spades. And so that you can understand what's going on with the entertainment and things.
Yeah.
And also, you've got the cobra, which is, we talked about the Nagas in India.
Okay.
And these are, again, these seraphim-like gods. And Nagas doesn't go back to serpent, it goes back to cobra, as opposed to sarpa in Sanskrit, which would go back to serpent. And so the cobra is a specific sort of look that they're trying to express with the Nagas and the serpentine-like individuals.
No kidding. All right, so did you want to add anything more to this one, or on to the next, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's going to enlighten a lot of things, and you're going to learn what they believe about Moses and Akhenaten and that relationship. Not that I believe it. What I'm doing here is just telling what they believe happened in prehistory, and that they're going to tell us in the end time.
No, there's definitely some Freemasons that are interested in that. What is it, the Akhenaten mythology or history too? Right?
Yep. Yeah, and speaking of Akhenaten, he's the picture on the immediate left as I see it on the screen
right
there.
Yeah.
That's sculpted. So if you bring that up, you're going to see, and if you were to turn that sideways, you'd see a real serpentine look. So you've got those extended sort of chin, long face, high cheekbones, slanted eyes. You got the cobra on top of his head mounting.
Yeah.
You've got the side gear that's supposed to represent the cobra wings on the head. And then you've got the conical cap on his head that's covering his elongated skull.
No kidding. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've researched Akhenaten quite a bit, and I never noticed that. That's pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, if you ever get a chance, go to a King Tut museum and have a look at that. It is frightening, especially from the side.
Jeez. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind. I go to the ROM, or Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and we often get different exhibits, so maybe I'll get a chance to see that. Man, that's cool. All right, so go on to I guess, is this the last section, or?
Yeah, I call it the gene of Isis, I think, and
okay.
So, or as part of the name. And again, all I'm doing now is just sort of bringing everything to a head, taking it back to the original bloodlines and the testimony and the knowledge that they're going to present, and just sort of relink and recap things. And I reveal things all the way through, so it's not just a redundant section. You're going to learn a lot there. In fact, if somebody is going to read my book, you can't speed read it because there's way too much information in it, and you'll start popping some brain cells. So, and it's loaded with information right through the 98th chapter. So,
okay, so how many pages are in your book then?
It's 800 pages.
Oh, wow.
And over 120 pages of endnotes, so that you can check and the veracity of where I'm getting my research from.
Nice. Yeah, that's really important to do. I'm glad that Zachariah Sitchin did that as well. I was surprised people make fun of him for not citing sources, but his book is loaded with where he got his material from, right? So
it is.
Yeah.
Well, he also translated directly from the Sumerian tablets, right? He was one of the few who could do that. Wow. Now, he was also a Freemason, so you have to understand,
I wondered
he
about
may
that.
have been doing a little bit of misinformation along with his research, so you have to take things with a grain of salt with Mr. Sitchin.
Yeah, that's the problem with Freemasonry, I guess, is once you're a member, you're limited about what you're allowed to talk about, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. Yeah, I guess I just took a picture from the website about where you can get the book. It's available in U.S. customers from Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and a Kindle version too. Huh?
And a Kindle version as well. And it's available on most online bookstores. It may not be on a shelf in a store, but if you did want to support your local bookstore and order it through them, they can. It's distributed by Bookmasters out of Pennsylvania, so
nice.
It's readily available.
Okay, cool. And then
and a signed copy, if you want one, comes from myself off this website.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's always nice to get the signed copy, I think. Yeah, I guess for Canadian customers, too, it's available in Amazon and Kindle. And I guess we're both in Canada, too, right?
And we're both in Canada, too. I get a lot of Canadians say, I don't want to pay any duty, and I say, I can guarantee that.
Well, that's good. Yeah, sometimes we get killed at the border when it comes to shipping stuff here. Huh?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much the end of the slides that I got ready for today. And we're getting close to the 2-hour mark, too. So is there anything else that you wanted to add before we start to wrap up here?
Yeah, no, unless if there's some questions that are in the Facebook, fire them through. But I guess the thing I wanted to say about the book, though, is that it's a 6,000-year connect the dots investigation into the giants and the organizations and religions they partnered with. How they usurped the antediluvian world, how they crossed the flood, how they impacted our history, what they're doing today, and what they're doing and why they're planning the end time.
Yeah.
And so this book is going to connect more dots than you thought possible. It's really unique out there because no other book has connected all of the different dots, including the secret society. So if you want to learn about the secret societies and how they fit together, then this is something that you need as part of your collection. A lot of people will keep the book as sort of a go-to encyclopedia when they're looking for something. So.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you have plans to write a new book, or is this?
I do. I've not had a lot of time lately to work on it. I've been. I do a lot of interviews and promotion of this current book, but it'll be more prophetic. My publisher would like me to do a sequel to the Genesis 6, but I think I want to move on to more prophetic stuff.
Oh, nice.
Obviously anything with prophecy is going to have something to do with the bloodlines and stuff, so it'll be connected, but it'll be more prophetic.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and the book that's already out, like the Genesis 6 is amazing. It's like, I'm glad we got a chance to go into it in so much detail. I guess, what's the best ways to contact you? For the show, I put a little ticker at the top that has all your stuff going by, but I'll add it to the description after the show also. But is there anything else? Like we got Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah, so if you want to get a hold of me and ask a question, I will get back to you or make a comment, and if there's something that I think needs to be responded to in the comment, I'll definitely get back to you on that as well. Nice. Through my website, there's an email you can contact me at. You can also get a hold of me under Facebook under Gary Wayne.
Yeah.
Or if you join my group, Gary Wayne, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And I do regular postings of my interviews and a regular blog in there and on my timeline. And also on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63.
Yeah, perfect timing. Right while I was above you on the feed. All right, cool. Yeah, thanks a million for coming on the show. I can't really get over how much I learned just about the meanings of different words and everything that's been going on with the secret societies and stuff. It's really wild.
Yeah. So if the audience liked the show and you want to get into some specific areas in detail, we can come back and do another show on that.
Oh, awesome.
We'll leave that up to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's I'm always up for guests coming back on, so we'll try to set that up for the near future, and definitely when you get your new book going too, it's like you can come back and promote that anytime also.
Terrific.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess any last words you wanted to add before we wrap up the show? Or?
No, I think that was a good show. I think we, if people aren't familiar with the subject, we gave them a lot to think about.
Yeah, I'm going to watch this episode at least a few times too, besides the editing. All right, cool. All right, thanks a lot, Gary, for coming on the show, and I hope the weather is good for you on the West Coast there.
Yeah, it's a little rainy, but it's pretty good. So.
Yeah, that beats snow, that's for sure. Okay, take care and have a good night.
Yeah. Good night. Thank you.
All right, take care. All right. All right, everybody, that was Gary Wayne on the show, and man, did we ever cover a lot of amazing information. It's like just when you think you've heard a lot about giants and you think you know quite a bit, it's like you get a guest on the show that just blows your mind, right? So, yeah, it looks like we had some more questions coming up in the chat, but we got so close to the 2-hour mark, I didn't want to keep this going so too long because it's going to cause Skype to crash and whatnot, and yeah, and I guess, is there anything else that I wanted to add before the end here? We got a whole bunch of wild guests coming up in the future, and I'm doing my best to set it up, but I've just been really busy with work lately, so hopefully work will slow down a little bit, and I'll be able to start doing the show more often, maybe get like, I guess we did 3 episodes this week, maybe we'll get it up to the point where we're doing an episode 5 days a week. That would be pretty sick, I think, so... All right, yeah, thanks to everyone in the chat. Sorry I didn't get a chance to answer everyone's questions. I think after the show, I've got a little bit of things to do with editing and stuff, but I'll jump into the chat and try to answer any questions that we didn't get to. And I really appreciate everyone for sharing the show link. And yeah, if you can tell your friends about it, and make sure to log on to my YouTube page too. It's Leland Judson at YouTube. It's like, even though we do the stuff on Facebook, it's always nice to get a big base going on YouTube, because when I ask new guests to come onto the show, they usually want to see how big of a subscriber base you got. So even if you're just watching on Facebook, if you can log on to YouTube quickly and just subscribe, that'd be awesome. It's going to help out a lot. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the full moon, the blue moon, and the eclipse that we're having tonight. So it's kind of neat. It's like every time there's a big celestial event going on, it seems like I managed to get a cool guest on the show. Yeah, so yeah, I guess I'm a little bit out of words for everything we talked about today, but yeah, thanks for watching again, and take care, everyone. Have a good night. The Magi Show was brought to you by the Milky Way. I hate this galaxy.